The sun was setting as I sat on the worn-out bench at the bus stop, holding my 7-year-old son Dylan's hand. We had just come from the shelter, a place that was starting to feel too familiar. It was like living in a waiting room for a life that never arrived. The scent of coffee, sweat, and a hint of something antiseptic mixed with the cold, a smell I had grown used to. Dylan squeezed my hand tightly, sensing my unease. His jacket was too big for him, hanging off his small frame like a safety blanket, but it was all we had, and it was more than I could afford to replace. "Mom," he whispered, his voice small but steady, "is this where we're going to stay forever?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. It wasn't just the shelter that made it hard to breathe. It was the lie I had been telling myself, the one where I convinced myself everything would be okay. That if I just kept trying, just kept pushing, we'd find our way out of this. "No, honey," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "It's temporary. We're just waiting for something better." The words tasted wrong as they left my mouth, but I didn't know how else to explain it. I couldn't tell him that I wasn't sure when or if things would get better. That hope was beginning to feel like a broken promise. I could feel the truth slipping away with every word I said. His hope, so pure and unwavering, was being fed lies, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending everything would be okay. I tried to focus on Dylan's little face, watching him look down at his sneakers, the laces undone. The simple things, the sound of his footsteps, the way he clutched his backpack like it was a lifeline, reminded me that there was still innocence in this world, even if everything around us was crumbling. And then, just when I thought the weight of it all might crush me, I saw her. My aunt, Margaret. I hadn't seen Margaret in over a year. The last time we spoke, I had just lost my job, and she made it clear that I needed to take more responsibility for my life. Her voice had been sharp, her tone cold, as if I had failed some test. Margaret had always been that way, successful, polished, and utterly unshakable. She was the kind of person who seemed to have it all together. Her life was the kind I aspired to, secure, well-organized, and full of people who believed in her authority. But here she was, stepping out of a sleek black sedan, looking exactly how I remembered, put together, flawless, as though she had never known a day of struggle. She spotted me immediately, and our eyes locked for a brief moment. Recognition flickered in hers, followed by a flash of concern. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. "Lily," she said, her voice laced with confusion. My name felt foreign on her lips, like she hadn't said it in years. "What are you doing here?" I blinked, the world tilting around me. Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. What was I doing here? It wasn't like I didn't know how I got here. I had made choices, or rather, I had been forced into choices that had brought me to this point. But hearing it from her, hearing the disbelief in her voice, was like being caught in a lie I didn't know how to explain. "Margaret, I didn't think you knew." I trailed off, the words catching in my throat. She scanned me, eyes flicking to the shelter's sign, then to Dylan, who was clutching my hand like he always did when he felt I needed comforting. His mismatched socks, one pink with a unicorn, the other an old white one that used to be white, stood out in the dim light. Margaret's eyes softened for just a moment, but then her gaze hardened again. She stepped closer, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. "Dylan," she said, crouching down to his level. Her voice, when she spoke to him, was different, gentler, warmer. "I've heard so much about you. Such a smart boy, aren't you?" Dylan nodded shyly, looking up at me as if seeking reassurance. I gave him a small smile, but the heaviness in my chest grew. Margaret didn't waste much time before her next question came. "Lily, why aren't you living in your house on Riverwood Lane?" The words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, stunned. "What?" I asked, blinking, trying to make sense of it. "What house?" She didn't repeat herself, didn't look at me like I was confused. No, she said it again, slowly and deliberately, like I might faint if she didn't. "The house on Riverwood Lane. I arranged for you to move in there. Why aren't you living there?" I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, the panic rising. "What house?" "I don't have a house." My mind spun, trying to process the implications of what she was saying. The last time I had heard anything about Riverwood Lane was when Margaret mentioned it years ago, but it was nothing more than a passing conversation. I didn't think it was anything more than an idea, a distant plan that never came to fruition. I looked down at Dylan, who was still holding my hand, still waiting for an answer. My son, so full of innocence and trust. I could never lie to him. I I don't know what house you're talking about, I said, my voice shaky. I don't have a house, Margaret. Her face froze, and for a moment I wondered if she was going to break. But instead, she just nodded, her expression unreadable. Get in the car, she said, her voice low, calm, and resolute. I didn't hesitate. Dylan didn't ask any more questions. He climbed into the back seat of Margaret's car, and I followed, still in shock. As soon as the door shut, the silence in the car felt like a heavy blanket, and I wondered if it was the silence of someone who had finally figured out what was going on, or someone who was just too tired to speak anymore. The car ride was silent, except for the hum of the engine. Margaret drove with her eyes fixed on the road, her hands gripping the wheel with a precision that made me feel like we were on a mission, and I had no idea what the destination was. Dylan sat quietly in the back seat, his small form crumpled against the plush seat, his eyes wide with curiosity, but, for once, not asking questions. I couldn't help but feel like everything I'd worked for, everything I had tried to hold together, was slipping out of my hands. My mind raced. What house? Why didn't I know about this house? My aunt, the woman who had been a pillar in my life when everything was good, had just told me that she had arranged a house for us on Riverwood Lane, and I had never heard of it, never been told anything about it. The more I tried to piece it together, the more fragmented the pieces became. My parents had always been the ones who handled things like this, but they'd never mentioned anything about a house on Riverwood Lane. Not once. I glanced at Margaret, who was now glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Her gaze was sharp, calculating. Her lips were pressed together, as though she were holding something back. I had no idea what she was thinking, but the tension in the car was palpable. It felt like something big was about to unfold, and I was stuck in the middle, waiting for the next shoe to drop. As we drove through the city, my mind kept spiraling back to my parents. I had been so focused on surviving, on getting by from one day to the next, that I hadn't even considered the possibility that they had been hiding something from me. Something as big as a house. Why wouldn't they tell me? Why had they allowed me to think I was just another statistic, another person lost in the system? I had trusted them, relied on them, and now it seemed like they had been making choices for me that I didn't even know about. Where are we going? I asked, breaking the silence. Margaret's eyes flicked to me for a second, then back to the road. We're going to find out the truth. And when we do, Lily, everything will make sense. Her words weren't comforting, not at all. I wasn't sure if they were meant to reassure me or if they were meant to steel me for whatever was coming next. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer in control of my own life. After what felt like an eternity, we pulled into a small diner. It wasn't much, just a hole-in-the-wall place with neon signs that flickered and an old-fashioned bell above the door. Margaret parked and turned off the engine, but before I could ask any more questions, she was out of the car, already heading for the door. I followed her, pulling Dylan along behind me, still in a fog of confusion. Inside, the warmth of the diner hit me immediately. The smell of pancakes and bacon filled the air, and the sound of soft conversation was a welcome distraction from the storm raging in my mind. We were shown to a small booth in the back, away from the other patrons. Margaret sat across from me, her posture perfect, as always. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she pulled out her phone, tapping quickly on the screen before holding it up to her ear. I could see her face tighten as she spoke, her tone sharp, businesslike. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I knew that she wasn't just here to catch up on family gossip. She was here for something bigger, something important. I had a sinking feeling that I was about to be dragged into something I wasn't prepared for. Dylan, ever the innocent observer, picked up a menu and started coloring on the back of it, completely unaware of the tension in the air. I envied him for that, for his ability to tune out the world when it was too much. I, on the other hand, was hanging on to every word Margaret said, every glance she threw my way, every shift in her posture. She hung up the phone with a quick click and turned to me, her face now unreadable. "I've arranged a meeting. We're going to get to the bottom of this." Her words felt final, like there was no room for argument. And truthfully, I didn't have the energy to argue. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. "I don't understand, Margaret," I said, my voice shaking. "What do you mean you arranged a meeting? What's going on? Why didn't anyone tell me about the house? Why didn't you tell me?" Margaret looked at me with a kind of pity in her eyes, but her tone remained steady. "Because I trusted your parents to handle it. I shouldn't have. And now we're going to fix it." Before I could ask any more questions, Margaret's phone rang again. She picked it up without a word, her eyes scanning the room as she spoke. I couldn't hear her conversation, but it was clear she was making arrangements for something big, something that was going to change everything for me and Dylan. After another long silence, Margaret set the phone down and met my eyes. "We'll find out who's been lying, Lily," she said. "And when we do, your parents will answer for it. They won't be able to hide anymore." I didn't say anything in response. My mind was still spinning, trying to process everything Margaret had said. One thing was clear. This was just the beginning. And whatever came next, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed above me, casting a harsh glow on everything around us. My hands were shaking slightly as I stirred my coffee, though I hadn't even taken a sip yet. The room felt small and closed in, but it wasn't the diner that made my heart race. It was everything else. Margaret's call, the mention of the house, the lies. It all felt like the walls were closing in on me. I glanced over at Dylan, who was still happily coloring his menu, oblivious to the heavy air around us. I envied him. How was it that he could live in the moment, unaffected by the things I couldn't even begin to understand? Maybe I had spent too long focusing on the wrong things. I had been so consumed by survival, by making sure we got through the next day, the next week. But now, sitting here, I realized I hadn't been paying attention to the bigger picture. I hadn't been seeing what was going on right under my nose. Margaret leaned back in her seat, her eyes scanning the room as though she was constantly assessing her surroundings. She wasn't the type to sit idly by. No, she was calculating, always thinking 2 steps ahead. I could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she spoke, in the way she made things happen. I was tired, exhausted from everything that had come before this moment, but I couldn't help but admire her. Margaret didn't wait for things to happen. She made them happen. She glanced at me and smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice low and calm. "But we're getting closer to the truth. I know it's a lot, Lily, but I need you to trust me." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what else to say. How could I trust her when everything around me felt like it was crumbling? How could I trust anyone when I had been lied to by the people I was supposed to trust the most? My own parents. The weight of everything was beginning to feel unbearable, but I couldn't let it show. Not in front of Dylan. The waiter came by, refilling our coffee cups with a soft clink of porcelain. I barely noticed. My mind was still spinning, trying to make sense of the questions I didn't even know how to ask. Margaret's phone buzzed again, and she excused herself with a brief nod. I watched her walk outside, the sound of the door closing behind her, cutting through the hum of conversation. I turned back to Dylan, who had now moved on from his menu and was quietly humming to himself as he drew. "How's it going, buddy?" I asked, trying to sound light. He looked up at me and smiled, showing me the picture he'd been working on. It was a picture of a house with a crooked roof and windows drawn in different sizes. "This is our house, Mommy," he said, his voice filled with a simple confidence that made my heart twist. I smiled back, even though it hurt. "It's a beautiful house, Dylan. I bet we'll find a real one soon." His eyes sparkled with the kind of hope that I wished I still had. How was it that he could believe everything would be okay, even when everything seemed so uncertain? He was just a kid, but sometimes it felt like he had a better handle on things than I did. Margaret returned a few minutes later, her face set in a hard mask of determination. She didn't say anything at first, just slid into the booth across from me. Her presence was commanding, like the room had shifted the moment she entered. I felt small in comparison, like I was a spectator in a game I didn't understand. But I didn't have a choice anymore. I had to play, whether I understood the rules or not. We're going to meet with a lawyer and a private investigator, Margaret said, her voice low. I've already spoken to both of them. They'll help us figure out what's really been going on. We'll get the truth. I didn't know what to say. My parents had been lying to me, hiding something from me, and now Margaret was promising to get to the bottom of it. My heart was heavy with a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, fear. But there was something else too, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Hope that we weren't doomed to live in this never-ending cycle of survival. But even as I allowed myself to feel that sliver of hope, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. Where do we start? I asked, my voice tight but steady. Margaret looked at me, her eyes sharp. We start by confronting the lies, by making sure that your parents can't hide behind their secrets anymore. We start by taking back what's yours. Her words were like a spark in the dark. It wasn't just about a house. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about taking control of my life again. For Dylan, for me. As we left the diner, the air outside felt colder, sharper. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, glancing at Margaret as we walked toward the car. The road ahead was unclear, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in the fight. Margaret was right about one thing. This wasn't over. And I wasn't going to let it end until I knew the truth. The car ride was tense, but the silence felt different this time. Margaret drove with her usual calm, but now I could feel the weight of what was coming. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I was certain that nothing would ever be the same again. My mind raced as the city passed by in blurry flashes, streetlights, people, cars. All I could focus on was the ticking clock inside my head, the seconds slipping away, each one bringing me closer to the confrontation I didn't know I was ready for. Dylan was in the back seat, still quiet, still unaware of the storm that was about to hit. He was drawing in his notebook, lost in the world of his imagination. I envied that, his ability to focus on something so simple, so innocent, when my thoughts were tangled in a web of lies and betrayal. How was it possible that just a few hours ago I had been sitting in that shelter, hoping for something better, and now here I was, on my way to find out the truth? The question echoed in my mind, what happened to my life? I glanced at Margaret, whose face was unreadable. I had always known she was tough, but I had never seen her like this, focused, almost cold, like a general leading her troops into battle. It was clear that this wasn't just about the house. This was about something much bigger, about control, power, and the choices that had been made behind my back. My parents, the people who were supposed to support me, had turned a blind eye to everything I had been struggling with. They had lied to me. They had let me fall, and now Margaret was making sure I stood up again. But standing up was going to come with a price. Margaret spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. "We're meeting with the lawyer first," she said, her voice steady. "He's been working with me on this for a while. He'll help us sort through the details, get everything lined up for tomorrow. We'll have the evidence we need to expose the truth." I nodded, though the pit in my stomach was growing by the second. Tomorrow. It was all happening so fast, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The truth was a dangerous thing, but it was the only way forward. I had to remind myself of that. "What happens after?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Margaret didn't hesitate. "After, we make sure they pay for what they've done. This doesn't end with them just apologizing. They need to answer for everything. The house, the lies, everything. And you're going to be in control of that, Lily. You're going to take back what's yours." Her words were firm, resolute, and yet there was a part of me that hesitated. Did I even want to go down this road? What would it mean for me, for Dylan, once all the secrets were out in the open? Could I handle it? Could we handle it? Before I could respond, we arrived at the law office. It was an old building, tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place that didn't look like it was trying to be seen. Margaret parked, and I followed her into the building. The receptionist greeted us with a polite smile and showed us to a small, windowless room. A man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that looked like it had seen too many battles, was waiting for us. His name was Thomas, and his handshake was firm, his eyes sharp. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Margaret tells me this is a delicate situation," he said, his voice gravely. "We'll need to move fast. I've already contacted the investigator. They've been compiling the property records, bank statements. We'll have everything we need to show that your parents misused the house." I barely heard the rest of what he said. I wasn't sure what was worse, the idea that my parents had been using me as a pawn in their game, or the realization that Margaret had been plotting this for a while. This wasn't just about helping me. It was about making sure the truth came out, no matter what. Margaret stayed quiet for most of the meeting, only speaking when it was necessary. She looked calm, focused, like she knew exactly what needed to happen next. I wasn't sure if she was just acting or if she truly believed this was the right thing to do, but it didn't matter. The decisions had already been made. When the meeting was over, Margaret turned to me, her eyes softening just a little. "I know this is a lot, Lily," she said, "but it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. There was still too much to process, too much pain and confusion, too much I didn't understand yet. As we left the office, I felt like I was walking into a storm, knowing it was coming, but not knowing how it would hit. Tomorrow, everything would change. My parents would be forced to face the consequences of their actions, and for the first time in a long time, I was going to have control over my own future. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It never was. I just hoped that by the end of it, I would be able to look Dylan in the eyes and tell him that everything was finally going to be okay. The night before everything changed, I barely slept. My thoughts spun in endless circles, running through the same questions over and over. What was going to happen tomorrow? Would my parents try to deny everything? Would they apologize? Or would they double down and try to lie their way out of it? And what about Dylan? Would he understand why everything was suddenly so complicated? I wanted to protect him, to shield him from the ugliness that was coming, but I knew I couldn't. There was no way to keep him in the dark when the truth was about to be exposed. I kept telling myself it was the right thing to do, finding the truth, confronting my parents. But the closer we got to the moment of reckoning, the harder it felt. The more I thought about it, the more the weight of everything pressed on me. I'd been living in survival mode for so long that the idea of taking control, of demanding answers, felt almost foreign. And yet, I knew there was no turning back now. Margaret's words echoed in my head. "You're going to take back what's yours." I wasn't sure what that meant or how I was supposed to do it, but I knew that tomorrow would be the start of something new. I had to trust Margaret, trust that she was doing what was best for me, for Dylan. She'd been there for me when no one else had, even if it was in her own calculated way. She wasn't just helping me out of kindness. She was helping me out of a sense of justice, of making things right. That was something I couldn't ignore. Morning came too soon. Dylan was up before I was, bouncing around the hotel room, full of energy. His excitement was infectious, and for a moment, I felt like I could forget the storm that was about to hit. He showed me the picture he'd drawn the night before, an elaborate scene of a house with flowers in the yard, a tree with a swing, and a sun smiling down on it all. "This is our house, Mommy," he said, his voice filled with that innocent confidence that made my chest tighten. I forced a smile, my heart a mess of emotions. "It's beautiful, Dylan," I said, brushing my fingers through his hair. "One day, we'll have a house just like this." But the truth hung in the air between us, the truth that we hadn't had a real home in too long, that the life I had hoped to build for us had been slipping through my fingers without me even realizing it. I didn't know if the house Dylan had drawn would ever come true, but in that moment, I had to believe it could. Margaret knocked on the door, her presence as imposing as ever. "Time to get moving," she said, her voice calm, but with that edge of authority that made it clear she was in charge. We gathered our things, and I tried to push the fear out of my mind. Today was the day. The meeting was set. My parents didn't know we were coming, didn't know that I had uncovered the lies they had told. I couldn't wait to see their faces when everything was revealed. But I also dreaded it. Dreaded the confrontation, the anger, the inevitable fallout. Margaret led us through the city, her eyes focused, her hands steady on the wheel. She didn't speak much during the drive, as though the calm before the storm was necessary to prepare us for what lay ahead. Dylan sat in the back, his gaze fixed on the passing streets, unaware of the gravity of the day. When we arrived at the venue for the family dinner, I felt a wave of nausea settle in my stomach. The place was extravagant, far too fancy for the kind of people I was used to dealing with. It was a grand hotel, with polished floors and chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. This was a place for business, for success, a far cry from the shelter I had just left. Margaret didn't hesitate as we walked inside. Her presence filled the room as if she belonged there, and for a moment I felt out of place, like an outsider walking into a world I had no right to be in. We were shown to a private room where my parents were already waiting, dressed to impress, their smiles stiff with a mixture of nerves and pride. "Lily, you made it," my mother said, her voice sweet and practiced. Her eyes flickered to Dylan, then quickly back to me, as if I were the one who needed to be managed. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. The truth was caught in my throat, and I wasn't sure how to spit it out. The anger was rising inside me, but I held it back. Margaret stepped forward, calm as ever, and turned to face my parents. "Before we eat, I think we need to have a conversation," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room. My father's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around the wine glass in front of him. He didn't speak, but I could see the tension in his body. He knew something was coming. Margaret didn't waste any time. "Lily was never supposed to live in a shelter," she said, her words sharp and clear. "You've been lying to her, taking money for a house you were supposed to give her." The room went still. My mother's face drained of color, her lips trembling as she struggled to find her voice. Margaret didn't give her the chance to respond. She pulled out documents from her bag, property records, bank statements, everything that proved my parents had not only withheld the house from me, but had rented it out for profit. My stomach churned as the truth hit me like a freight train. Everything was out in the open now. My parents could no longer hide behind their lies. The air in the room felt thick, like it was pressing down on me from every angle. My parents were silent, their faces pale, their eyes darting between Margaret and me. It was as if they were seeing the situation unravel in real time, but it wasn't just their lies coming to light. It was the way they had betrayed me, betrayed Dylan. It was the realization that they'd been hiding the truth for so long, letting me think I was alone, when in reality, everything I needed was sitting there, just out of reach. My mind couldn't wrap around it. How had they done this? How could they have let me struggle like this for so long when they had the means to help? Margaret stood tall, her calm demeanor never wavering. She looked at my parents like they were beneath her, and in a way, I suppose they were. They had lied, and now they had nowhere to hide. She didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to shout or demand an apology. She was holding the cards, and she knew exactly what to do with them. "Let's make this clear," Margaret said, her tone ice cold. "This house was meant for Lily and Dylan. You were entrusted with it, and instead, you decided to take the money and rent it out for your own gain. You thought you could sweep it under the rug, but now the truth is out, and now you will answer for it." My father finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "We didn't want to cause any more problems for you, Lily," he said, his hands trembling as he set down his wine glass. We thought this was the best way. We didn't know how to tell you." My mother's voice was softer, but it had a hard edge. "We thought you were doing fine. You didn't need to know about the house. You had your own life to figure out. We were just helping." Her words trailed off, but there was no mistaking the thinly veiled justification behind them. It wasn't help. It was control. They had been controlling the narrative of my life without ever considering what I actually needed. "No, Diane," Margaret interrupted. "You weren't helping. You were keeping something from her. You were taking advantage of her situation, and I'm done with it." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The words that had been building up inside me finally spilled out. "How could you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How could you let me believe that I was the problem? That everything was my fault? All this time, I thought I was the one who was failing, but you had a house all along. You didn't even think to tell me. You didn't think to help when I needed it." The tears that had been threatening to break free finally spilled over. But I didn't care. I didn't care about hiding my feelings anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for being angry. I wasn't going to apologize for wanting the truth. Lily, we didn't know how to deal with it, my mother said, her voice thin with guilt. We didn't want to upset you. You had enough to worry about. I laughed bitterly, wiping my eyes. I had enough to worry about? You don't get it, do you? I didn't have a roof over my head. I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. And you knew I was struggling, and you kept me in the dark. You let me think I was on my own. Margaret's eyes softened for a brief moment as she looked at me, but she didn't let up on my parents. Enough, she said, her voice like steel. This isn't about guilt. It's about accountability. You will both answer for what you've done, and you will face the consequences. The silence that followed was suffocating. My parents sat there, stunned, like they were waiting for a way out of this. But there was no way out. Not this time. Not after everything they had done. Margaret leaned forward, her gaze piercing through them. This doesn't end with just telling Lily what you've done. There are legal steps to take. The house will be returned to its rightful owners, Lily and Dylan. All the rent money you've taken will be returned, and there will be consequences for the deceit you've built around your family. I didn't even know what to say. I was numb, my heart beating faster as the reality of what was happening sank in. This was it. The truth was finally coming out. The lies were being unraveled, and I was standing here in the midst of it with my hands shaking. For so long, I had lived with the weight of their expectations, the belief that I had to prove something to them. But now, in this moment, it was clear. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. Margaret stood up, and I followed suit, the weight in my chest easing just a little. You've done enough damage, she said coldly, turning to leave. We're done here. I looked back at my parents one last time. My mother's eyes were filled with regret, but it was too little, too late. My father was staring at the table, his face red with anger, but he said nothing. As we walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Dylan would never have to know the depths of the lies my parents had spun. He would grow up with the truth that he was loved, that we were going to be okay, and that was all that mattered. Margaret looked at me as we stepped into the hallway. It's done, Lily, she said quietly. You're free. And for the first time in years, I believed her. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and more than a few tears. It was like the world had shifted, but I hadn't quite caught up with it yet. Margaret had done what she promised. She made sure everything was set in motion, from the legal paperwork to contacting the property management company. Slowly, the weight that had pressed down on me for so long began to lift, but the relief came in small doses, not all at once. I didn't know how to feel about my parents. Part of me wanted to scream at them, to demand they understand the hurt they had caused me. The other part of me, the one that had been trying so hard to hold it all together, just wanted to pretend none of it had happened, to shove it into a box and lock it away. But that wasn't possible anymore. The truth had already come out. The lies they had told were like cracks in a foundation, and now the whole thing had crumbled. The house on Riverwood Lane, my house, our house, was finally ours. I kept telling myself it wasn't just the house. It was everything. It was my chance to rebuild, to start fresh, to stop being at the mercy of circumstances. I had always dreamed of giving Dylan a home, a real home, but I never thought it would happen like this, not like this. And I definitely didn't think it would come with the kind of emotional wreckage that had followed me through this whole ordeal. I stood in front of the house for the first time, feeling the cool breeze against my face, my hand clutching the key Margaret had handed me. It wasn't the grandest house, but it was ours. It was more than I had ever hoped for, and yet, standing there, I couldn't shake the feeling of having been robbed of so many years. The house had been waiting for me all along, while I had been wandering, lost in the uncertainty of shelter life, holding on to whatever scraps of hope I could find. Dylan was at my side, his little hand tucked into mine. "Mom," he said, tugging at my sleeve, "can we go inside now?" I smiled down at him, fighting back the lump in my throat. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick. It's our home now. Let's go see what it looks like. We stepped inside, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The walls, bare and empty, echoed with possibility. The floors creaked beneath our feet, but it didn't bother me. It felt like the house was waking up with us, slowly coming to life. Dylan ran ahead, his laughter filling the space, his excitement contagious. Look, Mom, I found my room, he called from the hallway. I followed him, and when I saw his face light up, all the doubts that had been plaguing me started to fade. He was so happy. We were finally in a place where we could build something, where we could truly belong. I walked around the house, taking in the rooms, the windows that let in the sunlight, the kitchen that needed a little love but was full of potential. I let my fingers brush against the worn countertops, imagining what it would feel like to cook meals here, to host friends or family, to just be. I tried not to think too much about the past, about the lies, about the betrayal. There was too much to focus on now. The present, the future. I had Dylan to think about, and this house to make into a home. That evening, we sat in the small living room, the only furniture being a couple of old chairs I had picked up from the shelter. They were mismatched, but they were a start. Dylan sat on the floor, coloring in his notebook, while I curled up in one of the chairs, my mind still spinning. I glanced over at him, his concentration intense as he worked on his latest drawing. I felt a smile tug at my lips. This place is going to be amazing, I said, mostly to myself. Dylan looked up from his drawing, his eyes bright. Can we get some furniture for the living room? Maybe a big couch like the ones on TV? I laughed, a real laugh this time, one that felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. Yeah, buddy, we'll get a big couch, and maybe some chairs to go with it. The simplicity of the moment was everything I had been craving for so long. It was easy to get caught up in the chaos of the past, in the anger and the hurt. But right here, right now, with Dylan at my side and this house finally becoming ours, I realized that we were exactly where we were meant to be. Margaret came by the next day just to check in. She didn't need to say anything. The look on her face was enough. She was satisfied with the progress, content that everything had been set in motion. She wasn't the kind of person who needed thanks, but I felt it. I owed her more than I could ever express. Without her, we wouldn't be here. I'll leave you to it, Margaret said, standing at the doorway. But remember, this is your home now. Don't let anyone take that from you. I nodded, my throat tight. I won't. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. She gave me a small smile before walking out, and I closed the door behind her, feeling a sense of finality, of peace. This was our home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. Life's a lot like a house. You can't control every brick or beam, but you can decide how you rebuild when things fall apart. Take it one step at a time, don't let the lies weigh you down, and surround yourself with people who know how to fight for the truth. Sometimes, it's the unexpected support that changes everything. And hey, if you've been enjoying the ride of family drama, unexpected twists, and real talk, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Because, honestly, who doesn't need a little more truth and a lot more couch shopping in their life?